Chapter 1. Yankuba had had a bad start, at least that was how Dura and Pose felt. As they could not think of a satisfactory explanation for their only son's strong stand against traditional ways, they concluded that they had totally failed in their duties by not keeping Yankuba at the farm to work, like the other children of Pa Adekali. They should never have made the mistake of sending him away to school. As for Yankuba, far away in Freetown, he was irritated because his parents, whom he had not seen for about 4 years, were worrying because he was still a bachelor at the embarrassing age of 25. Imagine that. They sent messengers to remind him that many of his childhood playmates in the village were now the husbands of 2 or more wives, with as many children as they could count using their fingers and toes. And there was Yankuba, rooted in Freetown, getting rusty with age, with no child to call his own. He must therefore return to Pa Adekali immediately. Yankuba refused. He had a good job working as a clerk for a company which paid a better salary than the government paid primary school teachers. He had a big room to himself with a king-size bed that made him feel as though he were lying on the Atlantic Ocean. But some good things are like flowers that blossom today and wither tomorrow. First, he lost his job when he refused to lie to a customer as instructed by his manager, to save the image of the company. Then the world crashed on his shoulders when his landlord gave him 1 month's notice only to quit the big room and the king-size bed he loved so much. Yankuba fell to his knees at the feet of the landlord, pleading with him to extend the notice to at least 3 months. The landlord, a man with a lot of influence, phoned the police to help him get rid of an obnoxious tenant. Yankuba fled to his room and started shoving his meager belongings into a suitcase. On his way out he heard the pattering sound of police boots, just as he recalled that an old but acceptable black pair of shoes were under the bed. On hands and knees, he fast-forwarded underneath the bed, groping for the shoes, and grabbed them just as strong fingers gripped his ankles and dragged him out. He twisted round angrily to look up at the hard faces of the 2 police constables who towered above him like cotton trees. "We came to help you," said the bigger policeman with a wicked smile, "to remove yourself from this room." Yankuba was escorted downstairs with his suitcase, and out into the street. Certain that he had had enough of Freetown, Yankuba checked his money. He had more than enough to get him back to his village. Well, it wasn't such a bad idea to return home. "At least my parents care for me," he muttered to himself. "After all, I'm a qualified teacher. I have my teaching certificate, so I could teach at the Komolo Primary School. It's really not a bad idea to go back home." He took a taxi to a Shobi parking station and boarded a van whose driver agreed to let him have a seat at the front for an extra fee. The van, like a mammoth sardine tin, collected passengers along the way until it was jam-packed. After 5 hours of a bumpy, dust-choking ride through forests, dilapidated, scattered villages and some nice-looking towns, the van arrived at Pa Adekali Junction and ground to a stop by the side of the road. Yankuba licked his fingers and counted his money carefully before handing the fare to the driver, who shoved it into a worn-out bag without seeming to count it. He had already done so out of the corner of his eye, along with Yankuba. Yankuba felt tired and crushed. His mouth was dry and seemed to be full of sand. Hugging his suitcase, he began the long walk home through the bushes. He was surprised to find himself looking forward to seeing his parents with a sense of belonging he hadn't thought possible. Bushes and trees lined either side of the wide road. Once in a while the cooing of a dove suddenly broke the silence. From far off Yankuba could hear farmers in their fields, shouting as they plowed. He wondered whether his parents were still at their farm, for the sun was beginning to go down to sleep behind his back. The strong, whispering sound of the wind as it passed through the bushes and palm trees was pleasantly familiar. He walked for almost a mile without coming across anyone except a man wearing only a loincloth who was tapping wine from up in a palm tree. A few yards further on, Yankuba felt a thrill run through him as the dusty, brown tops of the houses of Pa Adekali village became visible. The news of Yankuba's return traveled as fast as a snake on smooth grass. Dura and Pose were beside themselves with joy. The foolish boy had finally seen sense and returned to his roots. Their wild cries of joy attracted the neighbors who flocked to the house to see this much-talked-about son. Pose broke out in a song, clapping and dancing with tears of happiness. The return of a child is like refreshing drink on a hard and thirsty earth that brings back to life the hope despair murdered. Her friends rejoiced with her and pointed out to each other that Yankuba had the broad forehead and nose of his father, and the finely shaped lips and thick lashes of his mother. He was also 3 inches taller than his father, who was only 5 foot 6 inches tall. Inside the small house that Dura had built with his own hands, the crowd pressed in on Yankuba and deluged him with enough questions to keep him talking all night long. Is it true, asked a woman called Mama Balo, that the houses in Freetown are as high as a coconut tree? The audience pressed forward to hear the answer. Yes, Yankuba smiled. In fact, many of the houses are higher than that. It's like when you take 4 of your houses and put one on top of the other. The audience gasped. Yankuba warmed to his story. Besides, a few of the houses are so high that if you had on a cap and tried to look up at the roof on these houses, your cap would fall off. Exclamations swept round the audience and more questions came flooding in on Yankuba. He raised a hand in protest. I will allow only one more question, he said. I need some rest. A short, bow-legged man with squinting, watery eyes pushed forward. Yankuba noticed that he was not chastised for his rude boldness, and as he peered at him, Yankuba observed that the man had shifty eyes that never looked in one place for more than a few seconds. He felt an instant dislike for the bow-legged man. Do you have priests in Freetown? Asked the short man, as we do here. Of course, Yankuba replied with an air of nonchalance. They are as common as flies, and all of them are thieves, always begging for money and then more money by passing collection plates around. Being a priest in Freetown is now big business. Are they really like that? The short man asked with an eager look of greed, as though he had been missing something. They are like that and worse, replied Yankuba. They rob the people by stirring up competition among them. They ask for donations, then announce the amount the Bangura family has donated, teasing the Conte family to do more than the Banguras. And that has the effect of waking up the Komara family, Yankuba groaned. Oh, don't talk to me about priests. They are all thieves. Not all of them. The short man shifted his eyes left and right and licked his lips like a snake. My brother, the priest of this village, is not like that. You must come to him to give you protection from evil spirits. For free. Well, the short man shifted his weight and rubbed his palms. Well, for just a small fee, 2 cocks at most. Forget it. Yankuba waved him away. I don't believe in such nonsense. The audience gasped, eyes round with shock. Your priest is the same as the ones I left in Freetown. The short man became visibly upset. I don't like you, young man, he rasped. I don't like your attitude. Do you know my brother the priest? Why, he's so powerful, he could cast a spell on you for saying such things. Yankuba leaned forward, snarling, is that supposed to scare me? Get out of my sight. You make me sick. Yankuba. Dura snapped. Don't talk to Sina like that. He is the brother of the priest. Now apologize to him. The crowd held its breath, waiting. Yankuba raised his eyes. I am sorry, he said to Sina, without any conviction in his voice. You will regret this. Sina clenched his teeth. You will one day pay for this. He turned round and the crowd parted before him as he stormed away into the darkness. Dura heaved a sigh, wishing his son's return had started better. But the boy was inexperienced, he reasoned. He changed his impolite attitude when he took a wife. And the earlier they arranged his marital affairs, the better. My brothers and sisters, Dura addressed the crowded living room, please forgive me for sending you out so soon, but my son needs rest. Surely, in the morning, Yankuba will answer more questions. Gradually, the people filed out of the house. Some admired the depth of Yankuba's knowledge. The elderly ones held their chins thoughtfully with far-vacant looks, as though searching out the future of Yankuba in the village. They shook their wise heads, sighed, and concluded that it was better to adopt a waiting attitude. For the next few weeks, Yankuba went around Pentkili and the other villages, renewing his relationships. The last person he saw was the headmaster of the Komolo Primary School, a large-headed man with a big brush of mustache that he was fond of twisting and pulling at the ends. He welcomed Yankuba with big smiling eyes and offered him the job of teaching the pupils of Class 5B. I was looking forward to meeting you, he said in a pleasant baritone. Your parents are my good friends, so anytime you have a problem, do not hesitate to see me, that is if you think I can be of some help. Yankuba wondered why the headmaster's eyes seemed to be twinkling with mischief, suggesting his words had a hidden meaning. After Yankuba had been teaching for a month, his parents thought it was time they told him what they had achieved. One evening, they called him into the privacy of their room and announced the good news. We have chosen a wife for you, Dura beamed. In his eagerness he failed to see that Yankuba had frozen with shock. Her name is Makalay. You will be getting married next month. Yankuba blinked. I don't understand, he said, looking from his father to his mother. What are you talking about? Pose smiled from where she was sitting at the side of the bed. There's no need to be anxious, my son, she said. You are only getting married. We have spoken to Makalay's uncle, and he advised us to inform you first. Yankuba stood up abruptly, his face twisted with disapproval. I will not marry this Makalay you are talking about. Must you treat me like a child who cannot wipe snot from his nose? Arranging my marriage behind my back, choosing for me a woman I have never seen or heard of in my life. He ground his teeth in exasperation. You cannot do this behind my back as if I was incapable of choosing for myself. Dura and Pose shrank back as if he had slapped them in the face and their jaws dropped in amazement. Then Pose jumped forward and gripped Yankuba's wrist. You can't do this to us, she gasped. We are your parents. Why, many of your childhood playmates are now husbands of more than one wife with many children. I've had enough of such reminders, Yankuba interrupted. Besides, what kind of primitive tradition is this, parents seeking brides for their sons without the son's consent? He turned to his father. Dura gulped and continued staring in disbelief. Father, what if I told you I am not yet ready to get married? You are talking like a man with too much mampema in his head. Dura stood up and took a step toward Yankuba. Do you realize the strain we went through in order to select Makalay so carefully for you? But father, I am not in love with her. Yankuba almost stamped his foot. I have never seen her. His voice softened suddenly. Anyway, I make you a promise. The moment I meet a woman who captures both my mind and heart, I will let you know. He raised his brows. Do we have a deal? Posea's face was flushed with tension, and she held back the tears of hopelessness that tried to squeeze through her lids. It was hard to understand this stranger who was once her son. Dura was not so meek. Do you think you can confuse me with clever words? He waved a finger at Yankuba. I'll not be confused. And let me tell you this, you may think you are wise, but if you were to climb up a coconut tree, I would still be able to see farther than you, for I am your father. We are your parents, Pose joined in. We only want you to marry and have children, so that we can see our grandchildren before death claims us. She fought back more tears. As you can see, we are not growing younger. I beg you, do us this one favor. Marry this woman. I can't, mother. Yankuba held Pose by the shoulders and gazed down into her upturned face tenderly. Marriage is a very serious business. I don't want to dash into it just because the opportunity arises. Don't lecture us, Dura boomed, gathering up his small frame to increase his authority. You talk as if you know something about marriage we are ignorant of. Just answer me this question. Will you or will you not marry Makalay? Yankuba shook his head. Father, there's no need for awe. Will you or will you not? Yankuba hesitated for a split second. I will not. Then Pose burst into tears behind the head tie she clutched in her hands. Dura's small body began to swell with bottled rage. Yankuba wisely but quickly left the room, closing the door behind him. Then he tiptoed across the parlor into his room. He went to bed, but not to sleep. He tossed and turned, reprimanding himself for fleeing Freetown, deceiving himself with the thought that his parents would let him do as he wished when he returned. It was not that he was against marriage, but imagine marrying a woman of his parents' choice, from among these bush women. What a laugh. Would such a wife be able to hold her head up against him in an intellectual battle? Wouldn't she bore him with her lack of intelligent conversation? Deserting a wife for any reason was repugnant to him. Surely it would be better to refuse to marry a woman he didn't even know. Satisfied with the logic of his excuses, Yankuba turned over and tried to sleep. Early the next day, when Dura had gone to his farm, Pose tramped through the forest to see the priest at his cave. The entrance to the cave was partly hidden by the branches of nearby trees. Light from a burning lamp could be seen through the thick foliage. Posea's footsteps echoed around the stillness as she approached. The foliage at the cave mouth parted and the priest came out with his brother, Sina. Where Sina was bow-legged, the priest was gifted with knees that knocked against each other when he walked. He also had flat eyes like a lizard, which were as steady as Sina's were shifty. The priest wore his dark brown sleeveless ronco which, though made of cloth, had the reputation of being bulletproof, able to withstand bullets from the spirit world. He was saying his beads slowly and stood at a safe distance from Pose. He didn't like the look of rage on her face. Sina stood by him protectively. "What do you want, my daughter?" asked the priest. "My goat." Pose extended her right hand, the left one was on her hip. "You will never fool me again. You are like quicksand, swallowing anyone who mistakenly puts his trust in you. For many years you have gobbled up my fowls until my yard became empty, deceitfully promising me that you'd wash my womb to make a second child grow there." Her voice rose. "And what has been the result of all the foul concoctions you made me drink? Stomach pains and diarrhea. That's enough of you." Sina stepped forward with a pugnacious look. "You are talking to a priest of the gods. A priest should do the work of a priest," Pose snorted, "but not the work of a thief. It was you, Sina, you son of a worthless palm wine tapper, who persuaded me to give your brother a goat so that he'd give me some magical powder to put in my son's food so that he'd do anything we asked of him, even marry a woman of our choice." "So, what happened?" The priest set his beads aside, flat eyes steady on Posea's agitated face. "Didn't he dash?" "Give me back my goat," she interrupted. "Don't move an inch from there without giving me back my animal." "Go home, Pose," the priest said, taking a step back to hide behind Sina. "You are not feeling well. Besides, the gods never return sacrifices or feasts, so where would I get a goat to give you?" Pose glowered at the brothers for a long time, quivering with fury. "So be it. Now I know your game, I'll play it according to the rules." She hawked and spat at their feet, then spun on her heels and left them with mouths hanging open in shock. "What do you think?" the priest asked his brother with a deep frown. Sina lowered his head like a tortoise. "We must impose a fine of 2 cocks on her husband. He will pay because he fears you more than death." The priest smiled, displaying small brown teeth. "That is true, but make sure Pose is not around when you tell Dura, or else we won't get the cockerels."